So welcome everyone to Mission San Juan Capistrano's virtual Earth Day celebration. We are here with Dr. Charles Brown, who will be leading a Swallows lecture for us today. My name is Jessica Crossman. I'm the Education Director here at the Mission, and I'm so excited that we're able to welcome Dr. Brown back. He is a swallows expert and professor of biological sciences at the University of Tulsa. And this is an encore lecture from the Swallows Day lecture that Dr. Brown gave for us about a month ago. And this is going to include some new information that Dr. Brown didn't share in his first lecture with us. So we're so excited to be able to welcome Dr. Brown back and have new info that he's sharing. So without any further ado, ever so slightly delayed, again, thank you everyone for their patience with all of our technical difficulties. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Dr. Brown. I'm going to make sure so everybody can see your video. And
okay, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. So we should be set. Okay.
Everything looks great. Thank you, Dr. Brown.
Okay, well, thank you, Jessica. And here on this Earth Day, where we're sort of contemplating the planet, what I thought we might want to do is talk about some of the adaptations that organisms are showing to what has to be considered a very human-altered planet. I don't think there's any way around that fact. And of course, a lot of organisms have not been doing all that well as people have come in and modified the planet in various ways. But what I'm going to talk about today is one organism that has done pretty well. And that organism, of course, is the cliff swallow. The bird that San Juan Capistrano is well known for, and the bird, of course, that I've been studying for many years in Western Nebraska, and the focus of the March 19th Swallows Day celebration. So if we sort of introduce cliff swallows for a moment, they are a bird of the Western United States primarily. They've been moving into parts of the East in recent years. These are highly colonial animals that build mud nests that are shaped like a gourd. Typically, at least historically, they would nest underneath overhangs on the sides of steep cliffs and canyons in the Rockies, the Cascades, the Sierras. But recently, of course, these birds have been moving on to artificial structures such as buildings, bridges, highway culverts, those sorts of structures, and that's where most of our work is done on this bird. The mud nests are often clustered together quite closely. This is important for the birds because they're able to observe their neighbors. They're able to share information on the whereabouts of food. It's also disadvantageous because the closeness of the nests facilitates parasites moving from nest to nest. So our work for the last 40 years has been done in Western Nebraska. I've been doing research there since graduate school in 1982. This area probably has the highest concentration of cliff swallows of any location in North America. It's an absolutely fantastic place to study this animal. But one of the important features of this study area in Western Nebraska is that the birds there don't really use cliffs. They have almost completely moved off of cliffs. Now there are some natural outcroppings in western Nebraska that these birds at least historically used. But now all birds seem to be nesting on these artificial structures. So here's a bridge over the South Platte River. The nests are clustered up underneath the eaves of the bridge. Means taking an extension ladder out into the water and sometimes a bit precariously climbing up to these nests in order to study them. Other cliff swallows use highway culverts, which are these box-shaped culverts underneath roads. This is Interstate 80. Some of these roads are quite busy, so the birds are living in very close proximity to vehicles. Here is another site that the birds use. You can see that this is a road bridge. Large numbers of cliff swallows nest inside this box-shaped culvert, and of course they have vehicles that are driving right under their nests. So cliff swallows are exposed to vehicles on top of them, to the side of them, and oftentimes underneath them. So, and here's just another culvert in the study area that illustrates again the proximity of many of these places that the birds nest to vehicles. And that, of course, results in roadkill. So cliff swallows, by virtue of their proximity to vehicles, these sites, these bridges and culverts that have so much traffic near them, birds are sometimes killed by cars. And this is not a unique problem for cliff swallows, although it's a particularly serious one for them due to where they nest. There is some evidence, for instance, that up to 80 million birds are estimated to die on US roads each year, millions more in Europe and elsewhere. So road mortality can be very significant for some populations of animals. And it's been suggested that this mortality is severe enough to exert natural selection on populations that are exposed to road mortality. In other words, certain birds that have particular features that allow them to avoid being hit by cars might be at an advantage in places where there is a lot of traffic. Unfortunately, we have very little information available on how road mortality may have changed over time. So for instance, if birds are getting better at avoiding traffic because of their continual exposure to vehicles, then you might expect that over time, you should start to see fewer animals being killed by vehicles. So we decided a few years ago to go and examine whether we had any information that would be relevant to whether road mortality might change over time. And the fact that we've been doing this long-term study gave us the potential to do that. But we were only able to collect or we were only able to address this question because over time, we had been very compulsive about picking up every dead cliff swallow that we happened to find. So in the course of our research, whenever we would find a road-killed cliff swallow or one that had died for other reasons, we were very careful to always pick it up, save it, and if it had not rotted, we would make a museum specimen of that bird. So we've created quite a collection of cliff swallow specimens over the years that have been killed by all kinds of reasons. So we decided that we would go back and we would look at the frequency of cliff swallows in our collection that had been killed by vehicles over time. And we make sort of the assumption that we're going to find sort of the same percentage of birds killed on the road each year. So that's one assumption that we make. And I'll get back to that here in a minute. But if we went through and we tabulated the number of birds killed on roads in the different years in the western Nebraska study area, we found a very dramatic pattern. So you can see that beginning in 1982, we were finding up to 20 road kills per year. And that number had declined to less than 4 in many cases by the mid 2010s. And this was a very strong and statistically significant pattern. So what this seems to suggest is that birds are being less likely to be hit by cars with the passage of time. Now, there are several interpretations of this that you could that you could perhaps offer. One, of course, would be that maybe the population has declined over time. And if that's the case, then you would naturally expect to find fewer birds on the road. The other possibility might be that traffic is less now than it was in the 1980s. Again, in which case you might expect to find fewer dead birds with time. And yet another possibility might be that that we as researchers aren't traveling around as much now as we did back then. And that could explain why we were finding fewer birds in the later years. Well, it turns out none of those possibilities actually pertain. Because if we look here, for instance, the swallow population size has actually increased over time. So if anything, we should be finding more dead birds with time if the number of birds in the area was driving this particular pattern. Similarly, we have found using a couple of different metrics that traffic volume in the study area over these 25 years has either not changed or it's actually increased. So again, we would expect more dead birds with time if traffic volume had anything to do with this. And then when we looked at our own travel within the study area, we found that there was no relationship over time. It was not like we had been consistently traveling less in the later years. So none of these potentially confounding factors could in fact explain the drop in roadkill that we observed over this 25-year period. So that led us to ask, is there any evidence for natural selection? And this would mean, if there was evidence, that individuals that were being killed on roads were different in some way from those that were not. So those that were surviving vehicles. So that led us to sort of to ask this question: are birds killed on roads different from those not killed? Well, we know that there's no sex difference among birds killed and not killed. We also know, based on banded birds, that age does not differ. Average age of those killed versus those not killed on roads that did not change as well. So we then ask, could the morphology, could the outside measurements, the shape of birds, the size of birds, possibly differ between roadkills and those not killed on roads? And morphology is a really convenient trait to study, because you can go, you can take these museum specimens that we have accumulated over time, and you can take measurements of their morphology. And what we decided to focus on was the wing length of these birds, because it's been shown that wing length is related to maneuverability. So we took our collection of specimens that we had archived over time, and we compared the roadkills among those specimens with what we call the population at large. And the population at large were birds in our collection that had died due to other causes. They weren't killed by cars. So these were accidental fatalities and misnets. They were birds that had died in their nests, etc. So they could be considered survivors, ones that did not get hit by cars. So when we compare the population at large, which is shown here in the white bars, with the roadkills, the orange bars, what we find is that the roadkills in general had longer wings than the non-roadkills. So birds being killed had anywhere from a 2 to a 10% longer wing than birds not killed by vehicles. And this was quite striking, because that amount of difference is quite a bit enough for natural selection to work on. Now, why might birds that avoid cars be selected for shorter wings? Well, one is that shorter wings confer greater maneuverability. This allows them to more quickly pivot away from an oncoming object, such as a car. It also makes them more effective in pursuing quickly moving prey. A shorter wing allows a more vertical takeoff, which could be really important if you're trying to avoid an oncoming car. But as in everything in life, there are also trade-offs associated with these different wing lengths, because it's been shown that for long distance flight, these shorter wings may be less efficient. And you can think about this. A fighter jet is going to have a shorter wing. It's a faster, more maneuverable aircraft than a passenger jet, which is really developed for long distance flight, and flight that's not nearly as maneuverable, say, as a fighter jet. So what we think is going on is that the bird's exposure to traffic, being around these nesting sites that are associated with roads, this has led to changes in the population in which the average wing length over time has gotten shorter. And we know this is the fact, that wings have gotten shorter. Road mortality, we think, is one causative factor. Now, it may not be the only thing that's selecting for shorter wings. It may be that the type of insects that these birds feed on may also be changing. As land use in the study area changes, that leads to a different composition of insects. And it may be that the insects that the birds are going after now favor a greater maneuverability, which could also select for shorter wings. But the point is that these urban environments in which traffic is a major component may often have a major effect on natural populations of animals, and they may contribute to evolutionary changes in these animals. And what the cliff swallow study reveals is that natural selection or evolution can often happen over very short relative timescales. In our case, we've been able to document these changes in morphology over a period of time of only, say, 25 years. So that's pretty rapid evolution. And this may be a common phenomenon among all kinds of organisms that are exposed to these sorts of urban environments, which are often very different from the sorts of environments in which these organisms formerly occurred. So some animals and plants will adapt to an increasingly urban landscape, such as cliff swallows, and then others may not. And this may, of course, in part explain why some species are doing well and others are not. So I hope that this presentation has given you some insight into how quickly animal populations can evolve and the profound importance of these human altered rural or urban environments that are becoming so common now. So with that, I guess we can take questions.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. So we do have some questions, and let's see. And if you want to go ahead and stop sharing your screen. Perfect. Okay, so we do have some questions here. And like I told you earlier, it seems that we have a number of students who are listening in, which is wonderful. So somebody was asking how old swallows are. So do we have an idea of how long swallows have been around?
We do not have good information on that. Small birds like swallows don't fossilize very well. So we don't have a fossil record for these animals. But they're not a particularly old group. None of the passerines, which is the group of birds that they're part of, none of those are particularly old. So, but we don't really know for swallows in particular.
Yeah, that's good to know. Someone else is asking why the swallows migrate to the area where the mission is.
Well, that is they historically used the area around the mission because it was a coastal plain before urbanization of the landscape. And in the 1800s, for instance, the mission provided essentially a cliff. The adobe walls and the structure provided a great sort of natural nesting site for these animals. And the surrounding area was very flat. It was relatively unvegetated. So it was ideal for them. As people settled and began to plant trees, the landscape has become more forested and less attractive to open country birds like cliff swallows.
Yeah.
But some still return to the area.
Yeah, there's a lot down by one of the creeks over here,
right,
in our area.
And of course, they've moved on to these artificial structures now, which historically they didn't have in the 1800s. So the mission now has competition from bridges to attract swallows.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, wow, we're getting a lot of questions. So there's another question that's asking if swallows have different names. So we know there's cliff swallows, but what other types of swallows would there be?
We have 8 species in North America. In Southern California, we have the barn swallow, the rough-winged swallow, the violet green swallow, and the purple martin. I mean, they're not, some of these are more common than others, but barn swallows and rough-winged swallows are actually quite common. And sometimes they are mistaken for cliff swallows because they often nest around people as well. Barn swallows and rough-winged swallows are also very urban adapted species. So you can see those right there in downtown San Juan Capistrano.
Mm-hmm. Do you have this is a question that somebody typed a little bit later, but it's related to what you were just talking about. Do you have an idea about how many different types of varieties of swallows there are in the world?
There are about 80 species worldwide.
Oh, wow.
So we only have 8 here in North America. The most species, the area that has the most is Africa, in particular East Africa.
Oh,
That
wow.
seems to be the center of their abundance in terms of different species. So presumably they evolved in that area and then have spread out and colonized other parts of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, let's see. So I think you just answered, somebody was asking, is there anywhere else besides Nebraska where they're found? So we absolutely just answered that. That was perfect. Let's see. Somebody's asking, what's the population of swallows? So obviously this is a big question, but if we're talking about cliff swallows, maybe do you have an idea either in your area or in general?
Well, there is an estimate. The group Partners in Flight have made estimates on the population size of all North American birds. Now, these estimates, you have to take them a bit with a grain of salt. But their estimate for cliff swallows is 86 million in North America.
Yeah.
So I mean, I have no way of really evaluating that.
Right.
And to come up with that number, they make a lot of assumptions and do modeling, but that's the number we have for whatever it's worth.
Yeah, I think that's great to just be able to share and also know, like, that's kind of, we're not 100% sure. It's just kind of how the nature of how things happen.
But they are very abundant.
Yeah.
And as you get more into the Great Plains, then that's where they're just, that's the center of their abundance now.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. See, somebody's saying, where do they live? Any type? Well, we did talk about where they live. The cliff swallows specifically in Nebraska is the place where you study. And then here, where else do cliff swallows migrate to in North America besides these 2 locations?
They go all the way to within the Arctic, to within side of the Arctic Ocean.
Oh, wow.
So there are colonies, small ones that have been reported up there in Alaska, quite far north. Now, the majority are not in Alaska, but they're throughout North America, southern to central Canada. Now, they're less common in the southeastern U.S., but colonies are increasing even in the southeastern U.S. So they're all the way across the U.S. and Canada.
That's great. I think we have time for just a few more questions. We have a lot of them, so I'll try to see if I can get kind of a good spread across different people asking kind of different things. So somebody asked, do they live in Mexico?
They migrate through Mexico.
Okay.
but as far as nesting there, the nesting records are few. But large numbers will pass through there during spring and fall migration.
Yeah, okay, that's great. So we've had a few questions about the swallows coming to this mission. So historically, we celebrate Swallows Day, St. Joseph's Day, Return of the Swallows Day on March 19th here at the mission.
Right.
Somebody was asking about that date. And I think you've already spoken to historically, they were coming here to the mission back when there was not a lot of other things around as much. These days, they're absolutely found in the area, but more in less like urbanly populated areas than the mission.
Their distribution, well, they're not as many as there were.
Yeah.
You know, their numbers in Southern California in general have declined over time.
Yeah.
At least since the 60s. And this is probably because of urbanization and forestation of the landscape. They just do not like treed areas.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So that has led to a decline in places where people have set out trees.
What's the scientific name for a cliff swallow? Somebody's asking.
It's Petrochelidon pyronota.
Wow, that's a beautiful scientific name.
Yes.
That's great. How long do they live is another question.
The oldest that we have documented is 12 years. And that's just a few birds. So the majority are living, you know, considerably less number of years than that. But that's the record.
Okay. We also have a question that's asking you, and I know the answer to this, but I'll ask you this question. It's saying, have you ever touched or held a swallow?
Yes, we have put bands on about 230,000 birds.
Yeah.
And we have taken we've taken them out of mist nets over 400,000 times.
Wow. So you've probably held
a few.
Yeah, you've probably held and touched quite a number of them. And this is all with the studies that you're doing, right? Yeah. So let me see if there's maybe we'll take one more question just in the interest of time. And thank you so much for sticking around a little bit later than we had planned, just because we got started a little later with our technical difficulties. Yeah, so let me just skim through here. Somebody was asking, what's the parasite, or is there a parasite that can be found either in their nests or with swallows?
Yes, there is a bed bug like parasite that lives in the nests, and we've done quite a bit of research on this parasite because it is very costly to the birds. They suck blood. They end up killing babies. So we've done quite a bit of work on them, but they're very similar to the human bed bug. And it's a major parasite. In fact, these parasites have a greater effect on these birds than predators. So
wow, I mean, that says a lot, definitely.
So.
All right, well, it's 11:45. Thank you so much, Dr. Brown, for coming back, doing an encore lecture after your Return of the Swallows Day, St. Joseph's Day lecture that you did with us. It's been wonderful.
I will mention that if anybody would like more information on cliff swallows and what we're doing, they can go to cliffswallow.org, and that's the Cliff Swallow Project website.
Okay, so I'm going to put that into chat.
.org. And
that's perfect. Cliffswallow.org. I'll put that into the chat here. And then we can put that into the comments in Facebook in a little bit. Well, thank you again, Dr. Brown. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, your Earth Day.
Thanks to everyone who tuned in.
Yes, thank you, everybody, definitely, who tuned in. We hope to see you soon, Dr. Brown, next year, hopefully.
All right. Okay.
Bye, everybody.